And I think the greater issue is, even if there is an investigation that ultimately proves that at the time of the shooting it was legally justified, I don't think that even matters at this point, because there is so much outrage and concern around what is happening in the city.
What do you mean it doesn't matter at this point? You mean the situation on the ground is already, the impression is left?
People have had enough.
So before communists proceed to burn down the entire city of Minneapolis, although I don't think the context actually really does matter to them, I do want to revisit the original ICE-involved shooting that caused all of this outrage to begin with, because we did just get a brand new video angle of the situation that vindicates everything we were saying from the beginning. So just to briefly recap on that, what we knew as of yesterday was that a leftist agitator labeling himself one of these ICE legal observers decided to attend an anti-ICE protest carrying a loaded 9mm handgun. Now, he got in a situation where he approached ICE agents, got into this physical scuffle with them. He was essentially resisting arrest. And then, according to the Border Patrol agents, he was acting with the weapon in a threatening enough manner to where they decided they had to take shots in their own self-defense. Now, left-wingers tried to say, oh, that's not true. He never reached for the gun. He had his hands up. You shot him for no reason. And granted, the video was quite blurry at the time, but my instinct was to go with the witnesses on the ground who were actually in that position. But now finally we did get a video that does clearly show, while the whole scuffle is going on, that he does indeed reach for his holster, pull something out, and in that moment, that's when the ICE agents indeed take their shots, which ought to be a case closed situation for me. Okay, so they already knew this guy was armed. They were trying to disarm him. Apparently, it appears they did manage to disarm what they thought was the gun, but he pulls something out of the holster as well. The accounts appear to be that was his extra magazine, which guess what? In that split-second moment, you have no idea, right, whether or not, hey, that's a gun, is that a weapon? What is, no time to discern. This all happening very quickly, which basically goes back to the central point here. You know, generally speaking, this is not advice just for leftists or just for black people over BLM. It's general law enforcement advice, right? If you're in a situation where they're detaining you or they're arresting you, whatever, it's first of all, not very smart to resist arrest, not something you should do. Secondly, right, when you're making erratic movements, grabbing for your pockets, also not something that should be recommended, and especially if you're in a situation where they know you're carrying a gun and you reach for your holster, disarmed or not, yeah, not a very smart thing to do, and that's a situation where, guess what, right? Guess how this works? When it comes to law enforcement, whether it's police or an ICE agent, understand when you're interacting with them, they have no idea who you are or what your intentions are. You could have full intentions. Oh, I'm going to be peaceful. You know, I'm not planning to do anything with this gun. They don't know that. They can't read your mind. And so, yes, when you're acting in a way that causes them to have reasonable fear for their life, which is the threshold for self-defense as legally speaking in America, right? That is something that absolutely can happen. So yes, again, this whole situation was preventable. Tim Walz, Democrats, you know how it's preventable? Number one, you shouldn't be in this situation. Some crazed left-winger should not, first of all, be approaching law enforcement with a gun for any reason to cause trouble, right? You know, it doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. Then you're going to resist arrest. They know you're armed, you know, in this very moment. Yeah. It's a situation where absolutely something dangerous can happen. It's why you should avoid it. And secondly, even as it pertains to crazy lunatics in the world, let me once again say, Minneapolis police should have been on the scene. If you think the ICE agents, for instance, are too trigger happy, right? Hey, after all, they're not meant to be local police. Their job is immigration enforcement. They're not meant to be dealing with this type of stuff. Then Minneapolis police should be on the ground right there, right? But they don't do any of these things. And then this guy reaches for his holster, and apparently it's fascism, and, you know, they just murdered him for no reason when they open fire. You know how this stuff goes. Anyways, guys, we'll react to this video here today, but I do also want to showcase to you maybe the admission of truth on this entire matter, because we do have the Minneapolis police chief basically admitting out loud today on Face the Nation that in the end, it doesn't really matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what the investigation says. People are angry, right? Essentially saying, right, we don't care. We're going to go commit violence against ICE and then justify it either way, because after after all, we're Democrats, and that's what our political party is all about, you know? Domestic terrorism and justifying domestic terrorism. So anyways, let's get into all of this, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, as you can see right here, this new stabilized video of the shooting of Alex Pretty, the guy who was involved yesterday, appears to confirm that while Border Patrol disarmed him, which is what leftists were saying, hey, they managed to grab the gun, so what do they shoot him for? He still reaches for his holster area and pulls out what appears to be the secondary magazine he had brought with him. Take a look for yourself. Warning, viewer discretion is advised. The content you're about to see is graphic to some audiences. Okay, so again, now that we have a clearer video of the situation, what does it appear like happened? So ICE agents did manage to disarm him in terms of his first gun, but from their perspective, you have to think about it from there, right? So what they know in this moment is that at least one firearm has already been taken from the suspect, okay? So they know he's armed and doesn't appear, given his actions right now, he's up to very good. He then proceeds to pull out something else from his waist. It does look like metal. If it's true that it was indeed the magazine here, as this user points out, it can look very similar to a pistol grip, especially in a quick split-second situation. It's a piece of metal. You already know you took one gun off of him already, and he's reaching into his pants. Yes, there's plenty of reasonable suspicion to believe in that very split-second moment where you have to act, because keep in mind, right? Keep in mind, they're all very close to each other. There's not a lot of time to look and see. Okay, by the time that happens, if it was a gun, he easily could have gotten shots off, potentially even several shots off, right? And that's the moment where ICE agents decide to act in that self-defense, okay? Now, some people have tried to come and say, oh, well, they already took the gun off of him, so why would they have reason to believe there's a second gun? Because lots of criminals carry second guns, right? You know, especially if you're up to no good, you're there to cause crime or some act of domestic terrorism. Yeah, it's very common to have multiple firearms, okay? They already kind of understand you're a dangerous individual when they've recovered the first one, right? So the advice in this moment should be what? I mean, first of all, let's start from the beginning. Don't get yourself here, okay? You know, don't first of all, show up trying to agitate ICE officers with guns. Don't resist arrest while you're armed, okay? Because that can go very badly, obviously, you know? You should act careful around law enforcement to begin with, just understanding, hey, we want everyone to be safe. They are armed. They don't trust you. They don't know you. Let's all keep it calm, right? But especially in the case where you're carrying a gun, and all common sense lawful gun owners do know this, yeah, you have to be extra careful. And certainly going to fight, going to resist getting into this tackling match with law enforcement, yes, that is something that can go very badly. And in this case, it did go very badly, right? That's why you don't get yourself in this situation to begin with. But if that all happens, right, and a law enforcement officer acting in a split second has to act in self-defense, and we now see what was going on from the video, what argument even is there to be made about this, you know? I don't know. You tell me. Anyone want to answer that? Now, a secondary point I've tried to see, and I do want to address this as well from leftists, is a lot of them tried to claim, well, allegedly he did have a lawful permit to carry, so we weren't sure about that yesterday. That's what they're claiming. So he was legally carrying. He never touched his weapon, which is what Brian Allen tried to argue yesterday. Clearly, he did reach for something. He reached the holster. He grabbed for the holster, right? That's what we're talking about here. But, you know, anyways, that's the argument. You know, he was in his full Second Amendment rights. And hey, right wingers, I thought you're supposed to be about the Second Amendment.
Yeah, fucking political. That was murder. An ICU nurse who worked at the VA, who was legally carrying a firearm that was fucking holstered while he was filming, who is now being painted as a domestic terrorist because he took a gun to a protest. But all these 2A motherfuckers a couple years back were screaming Kyle Rittenhouse's name from the goddamn rooftops.
Yeah, they think they're so smart and cool for this, don't they? Well, let me explain something, first of all. Do you know where the Second Amendment part ends? When you're resisting arrest, when you're getting into fights with law enforcement, right? Right-wingers, yes, believe that people should have the right to carry guns. But you know who else obviously should have the right to carry guns? law enforcement themselves. And yes, when you're getting into physical altercations and you're armed, right, with them, as I said, things can go horribly wrong, which is why you shouldn't do that, which is why I discourage that type of behavior. And by the way, it is deeply illegal. So, even if he had a CCW, this is not really what the CCW gives you the right to do. But even then, I'd further like to point out, even if you want to make this case, actually, he was not legally carrying in the state of Minnesota. And we pointed out those details for a couple different reasons, right? First and foremost, as Border Patrol yesterday pointed out, he had no form of identification on him. Minnesota state law requires that if you have a CCW and you're going to carry your gun that day, you have to carry both the ID and the permit for very obvious reasons. And by the way, I'm pretty sure even in constitutional carry states for very common sense law enforcement reasons, you still have to carry a form of ID, right? If you're going to be carrying a gun. Now, here's the thing, because I understand we're going to get some people, oh, well, that's unconstitutional. People are going to say, well, I believe absolutely in the Second Amendment. Okay, that's fine. But here's the argument I'm trying to make. Considering that liberals wrote these gun laws, they advocated so much for them, right? I'm not going to accept them then breaking their own gun laws that they wrote and then coming and crying to us, oh, the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment. You don't understand the Second Amendment, because if you did, you would understand that the fighting law enforcement part is not protected by the Second Amendment. And then secondly, even as it pertains to the state laws of Minnesota, it shouldn't be surprising, honestly. Democrats write them. They celebrate them as, oh, we're a state with common sense gun reform. We're safe. We're not like the crazy Republicans with their open carry, constitutional carry, all those things. And then you go and break your own gun laws, right? No, actually, I think leftists should be held accountable to the very standards they create for society. So if they're going to write those laws and then they're going to break them, and then these people right here are going to come and try to argue he was a law-abiding citizen, he was practicing his First and Second Amendment lawfully, doing nothing wrong. No, we're not going to be rebranding left-wing domestic terrorists as law-abiding citizens, especially considering they weren't even following your laws. Understand? Right? So that's the point I made yesterday about the identification. And by the way, even if he was carrying the permit and the ID, his actions are still not protected by the First Amendment. But I did even see some other people pointing out that Minnesota gun laws specifically, thank you, Tim Walz, hey, you guys support these laws, right? State that they block the public carry of guns on state capitol grounds and or political protests, right? So I would assume, by the way, this was a statute made in response to some of the open carry protests by right-wingers that you saw back in, Michigan and Virginia in 2020. And it's like, okay, so Democrats write that. They don't want guns to be seen openly at political protests. There's a situation here where, the gun comes out openly, because whether he was open carrying it or he was fighting law enforcement, that part's not yet clear thus far, but okay, right? At a certain point in this exchange, the gun is publicly seen at a political protest. It does appear that also was against the law that Tim Walz wrote. And then these Democrats, again, not understanding their laws, are trying to lecture us about the Second Amendment. Isn't that very typical? It's the same story on immigration, right? You're violating due process. You're violating the Constitution, immigration laws, this and that. It's like they don't even understand what they're talking. They don't even know what that means, Same thing with Don Lemon last week trying to explain the First Amendment. These people have no clue, but they act like they're so freaking smart, so let's just make that clear, right? Now, what you saw in this whole thing was not Second Amendment protected behavior, nor was it protected by the liberal gun laws of Minnesota. So, that's how it goes.
It's not a coincidence that these individuals have these masks ready to go. I mean, law enforcement, they'll look into that fully. But again, you have the right to peacefully protest. You do not have the right to put a gun to a federal agent or any law enforcement officer, and if you do, there will be a consequence.
Let's don't freeze frame adjudicate this now. He was there for a reason, and that reason was to impede law enforcement to the point. What evidence do you have of that? And here's a good point, Dana, is the fact that de-escalation techniques were utilized during this action. Those de-escalation techniques, whether it was physically trying to remove them from that law enforcement scene, that active law enforcement scene in which law enforcement were going after a violent illegal alien, or the use of pepper spray, which is another de-escalation technique. Those techniques did not work. Officers always try to use the minimum amount of force necessary to either effect an arrest, which in this case was more than likely 18 U.S.C. 111, assault on a federal officer, or
where did he assault?
Yeah, but here's the thing. Despite everything that we sat here and tried to explain in this video, at the end of the day, liberals, leftists, and Democrats and communists are simply still not going to care. Because the point is what? It's a moment. It's a story. The story of leftists throughout history, by the way, is basically, either staging events themselves or lying blatantly about what happened, spinning into propaganda, right, in order to basically start their left-wing revolution. And that's the same story right now. So, they have no actual interest in whether or not it's true. Hey, if we can sell this idea to people that, these fascist Nazi ICE agents are just murdering U.S. citizens for no reason, then our job is accomplished, and that's going to provoke the exact response we want, which is insurrection, violence, rioting, more acts of terrorism, etc., etc. And that's, of course, how these people are, They don't really care to actually listen to the context. And we know that because you heard that admission come pretty openly today from the Minneapolis police chief himself, who says, quote, "Even if there is investigation that ultimately proves if the shooting was legally justified, I don't think that even matters at this point." Well, why doesn't it matter? By the way, you're a police officer, right? It means everything.
From what you have seen in the public space and heard from federal officials, is there any evidence that you know of that Preddy was assaulting the federal officers as the Border Patrol chief claims?
Well, I've seen the videos just as thousands of people around the country have, and the videos speak for themselves. I think it's deeply concerning, the things that are being said. This is an individual that was a city resident. It appears that he was present, exercising his First Amendment rights to record law enforcement activity, and also exercising his Second Amendment rights to lawfully be armed in a public space in the city. So I think very obviously there are serious questions that are being raised. And I think the greater issue is, even if there is an investigation that ultimately proves that at the time of the shooting it was legally justified, I don't think that even matters at this point, because there is so much outrage and concern around what is happening in the city.
What do you mean it doesn't matter at this point? You mean the situation on the ground is already, the impression is left?
People have had enough. This is the third shooting now in less than 3 weeks. The Minneapolis Police Department went the entire year last year recovering about 900 guns from the street, arresting hundreds and hundreds of violent offenders, and we didn't shoot anyone. And now this is the second American citizen that's been killed. It's the third shooting within 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. People have been speaking out, saying that this was going to happen again. And I think everyone is kind of waiting for folks on both sides to come together and just figure this thing out. This is not sustainable.
It doesn't matter at this point because people are outraged already. Well, shouldn't it matter if people are outraged over lies? After all, if your side of the aisle is going to constantly scream to the world that ICE is just shooting random American citizens for no reason and it wasn't self-defense, and it turns out actually it was, and the American citizens are the ones who provoked the situation. Like that's not a relevant detail, right? Let's burn down the city anyway. By the way, you as the police, let's surrender the city anyway based on a false pretense, right? Seems a little strange, does it not? Hey, and what's even the wider narrative here? ICE are kidnapping people, they're disappearing people, they're deporting U.S. citizens, people with legal status, and that's not actually what's happening, right? They abducted and detained some 5-year-old child. Like, it should matter if we're actually living in a good faith country, in the type of country that is worthy of having a democratic system, right? Our constitutional republic. Then yeah, it actually should matter if what we're talking about actually happened, right? It should matter if people are acting on the pretense of truth, or at least what they believe to be true, right? At the very least, what they believe to be true. So what you're admitting here now, right, is these people don't care, even in terms of like propaganda, even in terms of what they just think, even if they're misled, right? They don't even necessarily think that is true. They're just going to go burn down Minnesota anyway and paint themselves as the good guys anyway, because hey, ICE shot someone and we basically admitted that we're lying about it, right? No, you guys just admitted all the outrage, all the virtue signaling, but also all the violence you're committing, justifying it, saying there's a fascist takeover America. It should matter to normal people whether the pretense of all of it is actually true, you know? But of course, you know, it doesn't matter to leftists. We knew that already, right? They don't actually care about details. That's why the moment they hear a headline, they go storm the streets. But, you know, if they want to defend themselves saying, no, actually, we fact check, you know, we fight misinformation. We're the side that does. Oh, wait, here's your one of your left-wing heroes actually just saying, no, either way, doesn't matter what the details are. We're going to be domestic terrorists anyway. So it's almost like that's exactly who you are. Civilizational arson was always your intended goal, and you basically just find whatever excuse you can to go out and try to provoke communist revolution in the streets. Doesn't matter if it's true, you know, whatever gets people riled up, apparently. And there you have, I guess, a great summary of the political left. A bunch of people who have spent not just recent American history, but frankly, a lot of world history, just starting wars like this based on fundamental lies. So that's how it goes. Anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.